Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Kerry Simmons, and welcome to Everyday Eerie, the podcast where the ordinary meets the extraordinary. Dive into the world of ghost stories, haunted objects, eerie places, and unsolved mysteries that will send shivers down your spine. Each week, we explore the tales that blur the line between the living and the dead, the known and the unknown. So turn down the lights, settle in, and prepare to be spooked. So this episode is gonna be more about personal stories. So this first story is actually a story written by my dad. He holds a doctorate in religions of man and is a certified forensic clinical criminal justice specialist who had done some work with Ed and Lorraine Warren, whom we touched on in the last episode about Annabelle. So I'm gonna read this from his point of view. It's called It Happened in Connecticut. This story is true. It happened to me, but the names are changed to protect the family involved. In the early 1980s, I was a student at Ed and Lorraine Warren's School of Demonology and a member of Ed's team. Ed and Lorraine Warren were ghost hunting back when television would never have thought of broadcasting a show depicting a group of folks hunting for ghosts in haunted places. They were pioneers in the business. I was just 24 at the time and had a strong interest in the paranormal due to the fact that I experienced many things in my life up until that time that I could not explain in any other way but paranormal. I remember it was on a hot summer night that began what would be a lifelong quest for answers about whether or not ghosts and demons exist and if they could truly possess the living. It was about 6 p.m. when my telephone rang. When I answered it, all I could hear were loud bangs and screaming. I could barely make out what the person on the other end of the line was saying. I could tell it was a woman, and after some yelling over the noise, was able to find out her name. When I heard the name, I was shocked as I knew right away that the woman was the wife of a man who may have been under a possession of a demon. Evidently, Ed Warren had given her my telephone number to call in case of an emergency, or if Ed was not in the area or unreachable at the time. After calming the woman down, I decided that I had to help this family, and fast. I called 2 other people I knew and worked with in the past and headed up to Connecticut from North Jersey. I remember it was 6 a.m. when I reached the front door of the farmhouse where the woman called me from. I knocked on the door and waited for someone to answer. I realized all was quiet inside and that whatever was going on during the telephone call had ceased. A woman in her mid-40s opened the door and invited us in. The moment we entered the house, her husband came walking out of the bedroom. It was then that I saw that he had a large stain on his white t-shirt in the shape of an upside-down cross. He was tearful as he spoke, thanking us for coming and telling us that he had been afraid for his family and was in no condition to help them or protect them from what was happening. When I approached the subject, he asked us to follow him to the back of the house to a bedroom just off the kitchen. What we saw when we entered turned our blood cold. The bedroom furniture was not only in disarray, but was actually broken up into hundreds of small pieces. There was wood everywhere, and a mattress lying in the middle of the floor that once was part of a grand bedroom set. At this point in time, my team and myself were so tired and in shock at what we just witnessed that we asked if we could rest and discuss our next moves. We decided that we would rest for an hour or so before starting a blessing of the home, deliverance prayers over the family. I chose to stay in the house and lay down on the living room couch while my team went outside and rested in the car. About 30 minutes into my sleep, I was woken up by a mass of flies that were in the room. I reached out and picked 2 or 3 of them out of the air before realizing that flies were too fast to be caught in such a way as I had just done. All of a sudden it hit me. Beelzebub was the lord of the flies. I made the sign of the cross in the air, and to my surprise, the flies seemed to disappear as fast as they appeared in the first place. Needless to say, I was more than ready to confront this thing, so I called my team back in and woke up the rest of the family sleeping in the home. I found out that there was other family members who not only lived in the home, but who witnessed the bedroom furniture being broken to pieces by something or someone unseen the night before. There was the oldest son, his wife, and a baby girl only 6 months old. We decided to have the young mother and the baby leave the house and wait outside in the car until we sorted out the situation. The son, his mother, and the father, who was the victim of a possible possession, were left with us in the kitchen of the home. The first thing I did was seat the family across from the team and the father at the head of the table. I had one of my team members begin in prayer and read the 23rd Psalm. We said the Our Father, and before we could finish the prayer, all hell broke loose around us. Doors were slamming, walls were banging, and chairs and furniture were being moved across the adjacent rooms right before our eyes. This was the moment of truth that every ghost hunter and researcher in the paranormal knows must be faced sooner or later. The moment when there are no more questions to be asked, when the reality of the situation is confronting you and all disbelief and skepticism is gone forever. There is but two choices to be made: fight or run. At that very moment, I faced the father at the end of the table and saw his face change before my very eyes. His eyes were rolled back, his cheeks were swollen, his mouth held in an evil grimace that I will never forget as long as I live. Blood was dripping from crosses that were forming all over his body and disappearing the moment it hit the table. He began to shake and speak in a voice not of this world. He clearly said, "I am what I am." I demanded a name, and as I continued, he kept giving the same answer over and over again. At that point, I knew of nothing else to do but confront him as a demon and command him in my loudest voice to release this man. I cried out, commanding him in the name of Jesus Christ to depart from this child of God and go to the place that had been appointed for the devil himself and all the demonic forces. I did this for over 5 minutes when he went rigid and stretched out his arms as if on a cross. He levitated head first off the chair to the height of a 10-foot ceiling. Just as my mind was wrapping around what I was seeing, he fell in a heap on the tile floor of the kitchen as if carried and then dropped from an unseen ladder. We realized that at the very moment, all of the action and noise around us ceased and everything felt, for the first time since we arrived, quiet and peaceful. The man on the floor came to and began to cry. We knew he was free. He later told us a fantastic story about his life as a child of satanic worshiping parents who actually dedicated him to Satan in a family ritual many years before. He told us that he had not been able to cry for 17 years until that moment. Needless to say, I walked away changed forever and a believer. So that's definitely a crazy, crazy story. But it just goes to show that these things do exist, and there have been so many people around the globe with crazy experiences, and I just don't believe that all of that can be a coincidence. So then that brings me to my next story, which is a personal story of my own. So we grew up in South Florida for the most part, and we lived in a house that we had built. So it wasn't an old house. It wasn't a house that was built on any significant piece of land from our knowledge. So I wouldn't say we lived in a haunted house, but this was an experience that did take place in that house. So growing up, my sister and I always shared a room. So my parents had one room, my brother had one, my grandmother who lived with us had one, and my sister and I always shared a room. Now, she is about 7 years older than me, so when she went to college, I had the room, for the first time by myself. So it was a little bit scary at first because I was always used to having another body, another person in the room. So I was a little bit freaked out when I had to start, turning off the lights and going to sleep and knowing that I was in the room by myself. So I would keep the TV on at night so that I had a little bit of noise, a little bit of light, and it just gave me a little bit of comfort. So my mom would typically leave for work somewhere around 6:30, something like that. And so before work, she would come into our rooms, give us a kiss goodbye before we got up for school, and leave. Now, she had been mentioning to me that when she would come in the morning, she could see that the TV was on, and she kept telling me, remember to turn the TV off before bed, or put it on a timer if you want to fall asleep to it. You know how the, old TVs, you were able to set a timer and say, okay, turn off in 20, 30 minutes, or whatever the case may be. So she kept reminding me to do that. So this one night in particular, I actually did do that. I went to sleep just like any other time. And now to understand the story a little bit more, the layout of my bedroom. So you would walk into my bedroom through the door, and immediately on your right would be my sister's bed. And then you would kind of make like an L around the bed. There was a dresser in between our beds, and then my bed was against the far wall. And so mine was on like the closet side. So I always had, one wall behind me. Now this particular night, I was facing the wall when I first woke up. So I hear the door open, and I kind of open my eyes a little bit, and I'm staring at the wall, but I'm sort of half asleep. So I'm not really thinking too much of it. To be honest, I was thinking in my mind that it was morning, that it was, around that 6:30 or whatever time my mom would usually come in, and that it was her. And in fact, I did feel something across my cheek, like a kiss. And then I went to turn over so that I was no longer facing the wall, but now facing the rest of the room where I could clearly see to my bedroom door. And it's still dark, but I see this silhouette of, a female figure, and I still was convinced that it was my mom. But I had an alarm clock next to my bed, right next to my bed. And at this time, we didn't have the iPhones where we had to hit the button or whatever. This was like an actual clock, guys. And so I saw on the clock that the time was about 2 something in the morning. And that's when I kind of woke up a little bit more. And I immediately said, "Mom," because I was confused as to why she would be in my bed at that time. And so in my mind, I'm like, did she really wake up in the middle of the night to check and make sure that my TV was off? Like, that's ridiculous. And then again, I said, "Mom," and this thing kept walking. Mom. Kept walking. Mom. Opens and shuts the door behind it. So I'm super confused. I'm wondering if she was choosing to just ignore me so that I would go back to sleep. It was odd. The whole thing was very odd, and I remember thinking that it was kind of strange. And I was like, okay, well, I guess she was just checking to see that the TV was off. And so I eventually went back to sleep. And then again around 5:30, 6:30, somewhere in that early morning time frame, my mom does come in, kisses me goodbye before work, going to work, and she leaves. This time I'm like really half asleep, about ready to get up for school. I wasn't really thinking about the incident that happened in the night. And so I go to school that day, and then later on in that evening, where we're sitting around after dinner, just kind of chatting a little bit. I don't even know if my mom would remember this, but I had asked her, I was like, "Mom, why did you come into my room in the middle of the night last night? Like, was it to check about the TV?" And she looks at me and she said, "I didn't." And I was like, "What do you mean you didn't?" And she was like, "Well, are you sure it wasn't Nanny?" And Nanny is what we called my grandma. And the thing to know is that my grandma had a bad car accident. She was hit by a car. She broke both of her legs. And so her gait, the way that she walked, was always very different, very like a waddle gait, kind of side to side. And she was a little bit heavier set than my mom. And so the figure, the form, you wouldn't misidentify her like that. I would have been able to tell, but it had the more of like a slender kind of figure, feminine figure. So it looked to be my mom. And so I knew it wasn't my brother or my dad or anybody, it was definitely female, and it looked like my mom would. So I'm telling her no, that definitely wasn't the case. And she's pretty adamant on the fact that it wasn't her. And when I tell you, those times where you get so freaked out by something that you get like tears in your eyes because it's so scary, because I think at that moment it hit me, and I've had this conversation with my sister before. What would have happened if this thing would have turned around when I said mom? Like, can you imagine? Thank God it didn't, and it freaks me out still, because it's almost like the more I said mom, the more this thing like hustled out of the room. Like it didn't want me to know. Like it was like, oh shit, I just got caught kind of thing. And that freaks me out. But it freaks me out more when I think of, what if this thing was wanting to be more sinister? And what if when I said mom, it stopped and turned around and I saw the face of something that was absolutely not my mom? What if it got to the door, heard me say mom for the last time, and instead of shutting the door behind it, shut the door in front of it, now leaving it and myself in the room? What if it got to the door and then did a back bend and started crawling towards my bed again? Like, when I think about the possibilities, and here I am just stupid and clueless, laying in bed like, it's 2:30 in the morning. Why is my mom coming in the room? When I think about how dumb I'm sitting there, just blissfully unaware of all of the like horrible, scary possibilities, that really freaks me out. So I'm thankful and I'm grateful that this thing did not feel the need to freak me out, even though it freaks me out that it even presented itself at all. I have no idea. Could it have been a family member? Possibly. Was there anyone in particular that had passed that I think it could have been? No, not at that time. So I don't know. It was a strange occurrence. Things didn't happen very, very often. But that one was definitely clear as day and is probably one of my most scary encounters. And so I still to this day can't explain it, but I, again, am super thankful that it did not go as far south as my mind is telling me that it could have gone, based on all of the worst case scenarios, all of the things you see in scary movies. It really could have gone bad. And the best case scenario was that it just left the room and didn't show up again. So that is one of my personal stories. Definitely, again, one of my more significant, really physical, felt something, really saw something kind of stories. And it's still unexplained. So, if anyone wants to reach out and tell me what you think, that would be great. But otherwise, don't forget to check out the Instagram page. You can like and follow that at Everyday Eerie. The handle will be in the show notes. And then again, I'm taking personal stories. So if anyone has any spooky story they want to share for me to read on the podcast, you can email them to me at everydayeerie26@gmail.com. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the eerie and unexplained. I hope these stories captivated your imagination and that you will join me next time for more tales of the strange and supernatural. Until then, keep an eye out for the eerie in your everyday.